It was just under 80 degrees Fahrenheit on July 6, 2015, which meant it was the perfect weather for hiking and sightseeing, and there are a few other better places to do that in Washington state other than the Big Four ice caves. Adriana Santana and her brother, David, would be visiting from California, and among the crowd that would flock to the trail and eventually the caves to enjoy the perfect weather. The warm weather had begun in May, and by July, the rising temperatures would unfortunately cause a chain of events that would tragically change the lives of both siblings. This is their story. The Big Four ice caves lie in the northwest of Washington state, just an hour and 30-minute drive from Seattle, and for a state that lies just under Canada, you would think the temperatures would be cold, and they are compared to other areas of the United States, but because the Pacific Ocean is so close, there is not a large variability between temperatures, with summer months rarely getting above 80 degrees Fahrenheit and winter months dipping into the 30s at night. So when temperatures do start to hit the 70s and 80s, well, it's time for residents to get out and view the beautiful outdoors. While most people know of Mount Rainier, and for good reason, there are plenty of other trails and sights to see throughout the state. The ice caves lie at the bottom of an avalanche chute on the Big Four Mountain's north face. This is a small indentation where snow and water has eroded a path through the rock face, creating a pool of ice at the bottom. The melting snow and wind from avalanches has formed the 3,100 feet of caverns that are maintained year-round due to the shade of the mountain. The caves are unique in that the temperature is enough to dislodge and begin to melt pieces of the cave, creating new offshoots and structures within the ice. But every winter, a new round of snowfall only adds to the structure. It is a never-ending cycle of melting snow and ice to be replenished year after year. To reach one of Washington's most iconic outdoor attractions, you would begin a hike through the trailhead with a very unique name, the Big Four Ice Caves Trail. It is considered an easy hike, and is just over 2.3 miles round trip. Therefore, there is lots of foot traffic year-round. The entire hike takes roughly 30 minutes to reach the caves and 30 minutes back to the parking lot, and there is no cell reception throughout the entire trip, meaning there really is no way to reach the outside world. If you were hiking the trail today, you would come across countless warning signs to stay out of the caves, warning signs that were missing from their original location in 2010, when John Tam and Tamami Okaoki visited the caves with their 2 kids. Similar to 2015, the temperature was warm in 2010, and this would cause a large chunk of ice, the size of a small truck, to break away from the primary structure. This chunk of ice would sadly strike 11-year-old Grace Tam. Grace was standing 20 feet away from the cave and waiting for her parents to take a photo when she was struck. Unfortunately, she would lose her life later that day. Grace's family in the state of Washington would establish a memorial and ensure plenty of warning signs were correctly established to prevent any tragic accidents to occur ever again. But of course, even with the signs, every year there are hundreds, if not thousands of individuals that enter the caves. And for a California family visiting the caves in July of 2015, this case was no different. 34-year-old Adriana Santana, her 4 children, and fiancé Dustin Wilson were accompanied by Annalisa's 25-year-old brother, David Santana, as they visited the state of Washington for a family vacation. David was also married and had 2 children, with a third on the way. Annalisa and David had spent the early years of their lives in Washington and had some great memories of the state and simply exploring the outdoors. Annalisa desperately wanted to share her memories of the state with her children and give them the opportunity to create their own. While on vacation, the family had heard multiple times from the residents of the state that the Big Four ice caves were absolutely worth the drive, as there is simply nothing like the caves. Because of all the recommendations and all the great info online, it was a no-brainer for Annalisa and David to make the trip with their family. Those of you with kids can certainly understand just how difficult they can be at times, but taking 4 on a 2-mile hike, even if it is considered an easy hike, Yeah, I'm not sure I would want to be in those shoes. But even so, Annalisa thought it was a great opportunity for her family to bond and see the caves together. So after roughly 30 minutes of walking, they finally came into view. The caves stand out as the white texture contrasts against the giant rock that it lies against, especially in the summer when it is the only ice and snow around. At the base of the structure are several caves that quickly disappear into the darkness of the ice, and of course, they couldn't help but notice all the people. There were individuals climbing onto the ice and walking into the caves, even though there are plenty of signs that directly warn against this. As Annalisa and David approached the caves with their family, it was easy to be influenced by the sheer number of people entering the ice. So after taking a couple of pictures from the outside, they would make the decision to enter the structure. The first thing they noticed was the blue ice and the beauty of the cave from the inside. They also felt a deep chill that could be felt in their bones, causing some to even physically shiver, as the caves were much colder than the warm temperatures outside. From the outside, everything was normal. There were still plenty of hikers heading towards the caves from the trail, and many people stopping to take pictures at the entrance of the cave. But as we have become accustomed to in many of the stories on my channel, in some cases, everything can be fine one minute, and the next, all hell can break loose. Those outside heard it first. It was a faint crack that rippled through the air. Then they felt the ground shake as suddenly chunks of ice, some as big as large trucks, began falling from the roof and smashing into the rocks below, ice and snow flying in all directions on impact. It was over almost as quickly as it came, and the ice had once again settled. Because of the rising temperatures that started in May, the ice had become thinner and thinner as it slowly melted until suddenly it was no longer strong enough to hold. An entire shelf of snow and ice would fall on July 6th. Inside the cave, Annalisa and David would be exploring with their families when they heard the crack, but there was nothing that they could do. Both families, along with several other tourists in the cave, would quickly try to take cover, covering their heads with their arms as they tried to duck behind any rocks they could reach. But unfortunately, there just wasn't enough time. Annalisa was hit by a large slab of ice, and she would lose her life almost immediately. Her brother David would be standing near her and be hit as well, nearly knocking him unconscious. As those who were lucky and uninjured began looking up, the first thing everyone noticed was the sheer amount of ice now on the floor of the cave. Then it would be the few people who still lay on the ground, screaming in pain because of a broken bone or other injury. But the scariest sight was those not making a sound. There were several people unconscious and even more who were injured. Annalisa's fiance, Dustin, had injured his leg, but along with several others was helped out of the cave with David and Annalisa's 4 children, but they would be missing one family member. Because of no cell reception, it was difficult to inform anyone, much less rescue teams, as it would take a couple of hikers over 30 minutes till they would reach their vehicle, then another 14 minutes to reach a phone where they could let officials know of the accident. As we commonly see in these types of stories, those first few minutes after the accident are absolutely crucial, and waiting 45 minutes after the cave collapsed could quite literally be the difference between life and death. To put it simply, it is a failure by the state to not have a closer emergency phone. A rescue helicopter would be sent to the cave shortly after the call came in, and their first life flight would be David Santana, who was barely conscious after suffering from blunt force trauma. Dustin and all 4 of Annalisa's children would make their way to the hospital as well. Dustin would have to have leg surgery, but thankfully, along with Annalisa's kids, they would all 5 make a full recovery. I wish I could say the same about David, as he would battle in critical care for 3 months before he too would pass away from his injuries. David would leave behind his wife and 3 kids. Annalisa and David were both described as caring and loving people, especially when it came to their families. They were known for having huge hearts, and that can certainly be seen in the story, as all they wanted to do was genuinely give their kids memories that they could cherish forever. But everything can change in just 1 second. It would be 2 days before Annalise's body would be removed from the back of the caves, and it was a tedious process as rescue teams had to be wary of another collapse. But thankfully, there were no more accidents. The Big Four ice caves would be closed for months as the state reassessed how they would keep the public safe. Eventually, they would begin the process of installing closer emergency landlines to the cave, so if there ever was another collapse, rescue teams could reach the caves significantly quicker. They also established even more warning signs telling tourists to stay out of the caves. But since it is not illegal to enter, to this day there are still thousands of hikers every single year that roll the dice. I know the state can only do so much, but this still feels like a failure to me, as 2 innocent lives were lost and families were changed forever. Yet the changes, while needed, are simply just not severe enough to prevent another accident from ever happening again. While I wish that on nobody, unfortunately, I see it as only a matter of time.